Okay, recording started. So yeah, as I said, welcome everyone to the October session for the Power BI data analytics for Enviro's. For those people that are new to our sessions, just a bit of housekeeping. So please give Michael, the presenter, the courtesy of just putting yourself on mute when you're not speaking. But by all means, if you have questions, and we've in terms of timing for this particular session, there will be an opportunity for questions if you wanted to turn the video on. Come on and just ask your questions via the microphone, or alternatively, you can just write them in the chat and we'll just try and answer them as we go. As a reminder, we're recording this session and we'll make it available on our blog and YouTube channel afterwards, and just a simple Teams tick if you wanted to zoom into the screen here. Just like to acknowledge the people of the Boon Wurrung and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners and custodians of the land and waters where we are presenting from down in Sorrento and the Mornington Peninsula, and also acknowledge the traditional owners from anywhere where you're dialing in from, whether it be across Australia or internationally as well. Also wanted to flag, we're in the middle of National Water Week. So each year, National Water Week makes a splash across Australia, inspiring communities, organisations to work together on water issues and future fixes. I mean, you don't need to look very far from home, based on where you're dialing in from, to see the floods we're having, up and down the East Coast in various parts. A few years ago, it was droughts. So it's throwing all sorts of spanners. So it just really highlights, excuse me, the importance of water, not just during National Water Week, but it is one of these necessities of life that we all need for a sustainable future. This year's theme is sharing water stories, and there's a few links and events probably in your local area over the next few days. You can check that in the links down here. All coordinated, sponsored by the Australian Water Association, AWA, who do some great work in terms of water importance and highlighting different things. Just a bit about us. Alice and I, co-founders of Discovery Eye, for those people that don't know. So we largely focus on Power BI solutions, both project work and training across the environmental and water industry. And we put on these meetups every month. So it's great to have you all on the call. And the meetup group continues to grow. I think we're up to 1,650 members now, and always got very interesting guest speakers. And I think great practical applications of Power BI solutions and different tips and tricks from across the water industry and environmental industry. So yeah, great to have everyone involved in today's session, which is focusing on Wannon Water's data analysis and reporting scope considerations framework. And we're lucky enough to have Michael Crothers, who works at Wannon Water as one of the data analysts, presenting on his experiences both within Wannon, but also some of his former work and life, with a lot of experience working in the Power BI space. So more specifically, the session details is Michael will present on this framework that he's putting together for Wannon Water to support Power BI developers during the scoping phase of data analysis and reporting, so they can hopefully get the most both for developers and also end users or stakeholders to consider the key elements as part of the development process. Michael's going to share a few different examples to help sort of hammer home the front elements in the framework. So really looking forward to the session. A lot of us on the call, Power BI report developers involved in this sort of space. If you don't get your scope and foundations and, things set up right at the very start, then, you can have challenges in terms of the Power BI development process and making sure you're ticking the right boxes and presenting data in the right way for people to be able to make decisions. In terms of a bit about Michael, work management system data analyst at Wannon. Wannon Water are based out of Warrnambool in Victoria, so regional Vic. Part of his role is involved in developing the Power BI reports across a range of departments, and has a lot of experience in this space, dealing with stakeholders, gathering requirements, and then implementing that in terms of these Power BI report solutions. So it's great to have you on, Michael. And I think, there's a lot of people on the call that are really looking forward to this session. With that, mate, I'll stop sharing and happy to hand it across to you and we can get into it.
Thanks, Christian, and thanks everybody for attending. Now I'll just try to navigate sharing my screen. Bear with me. Okay, so just following on from Christian, who am I? So I'm based in Warrnambool, southwest Victoria, for those who aren't familiar with where Warrnambool is. I've spent 15 years as a business analyst role for a consulting firm here in Warrnambool. which was sort of an evolved role. And it gave me great exposure to a number of different industries and I guess different sort of work practices. But I think the key that I found was that, as Christian said, when you're developing a report, it's very important to get it right from the start. My findings over the years as a business analyst role was, I guess, leading towards this considerations framework. I started working with Wannon Water in February 2022. It was a relatively new role as a works management systems data analyst. And what does that mean? So we use Maximo as our works management system. And my role is to, I guess, utilize all the information or the data that we're capturing on work orders and turn it into useful information for people to make decisions throughout the business. And just a bit further background on my Power BI experience. Always loved working with Excel. In about 2016, I think it was, discovered Tableau and then eventually migrated to Power BI in maybe 2017 or 2018 and fell in love with it. It was such a useful tool and I've just sort of managed to find my way through developing reports ever since. And then come on to Wannon Water and they've got such a great support team and we utilise Discover AI as well, which has been really good. It's a really good culture of Power BI usage. As Christian said, I'm here today to talk about something I'm sort of developing at the moment, which is the Data Analysis and Reporting Scope Considerations Framework. So why Considerations Framework? I guess the key purpose was to transfer knowledge to Wannon Water from my past experiences, because as I said, I was working in a small firm. I was pretty much finding my own way in the Power BI world, and then all of a sudden discovered that there was a large network out there of people in similar circumstances. So I listened to a lot of podcasts, did a lot of failing and a lot of learning along my journey in terms of data modeling and things like that. But it always came back to getting, I guess, the project right at the start in the scoping phase. And I guess the reason that I'm calling it a considerations framework is because not everything it's not a process. It's not something that I envision people need to follow. It's more highlighting the things that should be considered when developing a report or a piece of analysis. So it's just to be used as a guide during the scoping phase. To consider the good elements, so elements of good practice, data analysis and reporting to help engage the audience and convey messages. So asking these questions of yourself and stakeholders will ensure you have considered all aspects closely and help build a scope of works. So when is it relevant? So we've got all the fun stuff here, the development, testing and prod, right up at the front. So when you're planning your report, and it can help establish a scope of works. So this is the overarching sort of framework. So I've managed to sort of split it up into 4 components, key components. So the purpose of the analysis or report, which is the why, sources and resources, so the what, perspective of audience, so the who, context and scale, so the how. So I'll just try to, I won't try to delve too far into some of it, but I'll step through a couple of the processes as we go. So I guess the overarching themes over on the left, and then some of the key questions that I typically would ask in the past. And then here's some of the considerations down below. So as I said, not all of these will be relevant to each project, but it's usually the sort of things that I think about. And I guess the reason that this was developed is because my manager sort of asked me, so what would you do? What's the process? And I thought, well, I just do it. So, which wasn't the best answer. And I sort of started to sit down and think about, well, how can I transfer this knowledge? So I sort of mapped it out. So I guess the key question is, so the purpose of the analysis or report. So why? So we've got to consider, why are we doing this and what impact will it have? So typically I find that we're trying to solve a problem. Even if it's an opportunity out there, it could be that there's a problem attached to it. So if you're entering into a new market, if you're a retail business, that's an opportunity, but there's a problem. What's the market? Where are we going to launch? And then there's some key questions. So yeah, are we addressing the cause of the problem or its effects? Yeah, what opportunities can be derived from the problem? How can the data analysis or reporting be used to intervene or address the problem? Sometimes it's automation of process, information decision makers, informed decision makers, change behaviours. So what high-level questions are we trying to answer to help address the problem? Are they qualitative or quantitative? Are they nice to know or need to know? What type of report will help answer these questions? So is it a performance monitoring or reporting type of report? Forecasting, modelling or performance? Investigative analysis? And what do we already know about the problem? So what work already exists? I guess we try to avoid duplication of effort, particularly in large organisations. So if there's somebody else that's already done some work in that space, and it's definitely worth engaging with them and having a discussion. So I'll just step into an example of purpose. So just bear with me. So this is a report, and I'll just reiterate that given I've started in February, most of my reports are still in sort of a test phase, and I'm hoping to get them developed and published within the organisation soon. But this particular one was born out of a purpose. There were some managers that weren't aware of some work orders that were raised as priority 1s and 2s. So they sort of, I guess, wanted to be able to, because with Maximo you can pull the information out, but it doesn't present in front of you in a live fashion. So in our organisation, a priority 1 and 2 work order needs to be addressed within sort of 1 to 2 to 3 days. So I started to ask the question, so I guess how many priority 1s and 2s do we have in a sort of a time frame? So I broke it down to our different levels there in the maintenance area. So we've got civil, mechanical and electrical. Just simply ask the question, so where are they? Where are all the priority 1s? What status are they in? Days since reported. So this looks pretty bleak at the moment because there's not much data in there. But when it actually refreshes on a daily basis. So when I developed it about 3 weeks ago, there was a lot more work orders sitting in there. So it's sort of, things are cleared out a bit. Unfortunately, I didn't take any captures of it at the time, but what it's actually done is it's given us the ability to identify, okay, there's a number of work orders that have been a priority 1, and they've been for a priority 1, and they haven't been resolved for greater than 5 days. So we've got the tooltip where you can hover over and see what the work orders actually are. And then it's really about asking the question, if they've haven't been resolved after greater than 5 days, are they really a priority 1? So once again, the purpose of this report was to help the managers get a good grasp, I guess, of what the priority 1s and 2s are doing. Are they getting addressed? And then we've just got a different view. So this is just a bit more in depth with a summary and a description of the work orders. We can filter out, as you're aware, on specifics. So there's 2 that are still assigned. We can drill down and see what those are. ESC reporting is pretty important in my role. So I've just put in a little toggle button there just to highlight the ones that are, I guess, related to the Essential Services Commission reporting that I'm required to do. And then I've just got another level of view where we can see, I guess, the map. So that's the different assets. And I guess the height of the bar there in this instance is representing the number of days since the work order was reported. So it's really flagging that there's some work orders that I guess need to be attended to. And then I've broken that down again for the managers. So each manager of the different areas, so the manager of civil will have their own view, and they can drill down on specific areas as well.
Very, sorry, Michael,
That's all right.
Looks really good. I mean, the sort of different layers of information in terms of sort of more snapshot, and then presenting it more detailed for people that are interested is a really, clever way of doing it. Also, like, is that the Azure map you're using there for the extrusions?
Yeah. I find it really, I find using circles or as a spatial, it doesn't really give you much of a representation of scale. Because, is a circle double the size? Does that mean that there's, double work orders, or it's sort of, it doesn't provide great scale? But I find this one with the bars, it does. And it's easy to tag the assets as long as you've got the latitude and longitude for them as well.
No, that's really good. We did actually have a question from Simon. If now's a good time.
Go for it.
Yeah, so Simon just want to know, do you use the Microsoft development pipeline to productionize your reporting? And I don't know, Simon, if you wanted to jump on and add to that question.
Yes, thanks, Christian. So Michael, I was really just asking about the Power BI development pipelines in terms of a governance mechanism. So because you mentioned your reporting that you're still very much in the discovery type phase, but are you using the development pipelines to work through the different environments?
Yeah, we are, but as an organisation, we are. But as I sort of mentioned, given I've only sort of stepped in, most of mine are still I've just sort of in either the development or the test phase. And I've been, we do use Maximo, and we've only just got full access to the server. So I've sort of been waiting. We had about 10% access, so I was substituting a lot of the information with spreadsheets. So I've sort of been waiting for the connection to I guess fully develop them and hopefully start moving them into prod.
Okay, so just a follow-up question. So with this mech-elect type reporting, so with your stakeholders, do you sort of showcase what you've come up with as you're discovering and building, so they can guide you on what's useful? Because I noticed you're using a tooltip to show all the tasks, all the work orders, instead of a drill through. So I just thought it was interesting that are you getting feedback from your stakeholders that a tooltip's a good thing to display it?
Yeah, I guess that's a personal preference of mine. I haven't had any negative feedback. I think most have engaged with it well. But typically, especially with this report, I've been meeting with the managers, and we're at a stage where we're looking to test with them as well. I've set up, I'll just hopefully can show this. I've set up they used to be called goals, but they're now called metrics. Some metrics to help answer some of the questions. So this is a component that we're starting to test with them as well. So I guess the two key questions are, so how many priority ones were reported more than 5 days ago? So what you can do is you can set your target, and we're saying we want 0 priority 1s and 2s that are greater than 5 days since they've been reported. Currently, we've got 21. So what this does is it tracks them over time. And if once we do get it below 0, once it goes above that target, it shoots them a Teams message to say, hey, it's gone above the target. And we're really trying to test this because I haven't done it before, so it's all sort of new to me.
But then the metrics is quite new in general in terms of Microsoft putting a lot into it. So this looks really good. Sorry to jump in.
No, that's fine. So it's a really good opportunity because it's something that they don't need to be looking at the report all the time. They really just want to know what they need to know. So it'll ping them a message to say, hey, there's some activity, jump in and have a look. So they can look at the trends over time as well. And then click on the report. Hopefully that works. Yeah, and then it takes them through to the report as well.
So how do you validate the accuracy of the reports, for example? So you mentioned you only had access to a subset of the Maximo data. So because the first question you're going to get is that, how do I know that number is accurate?
Yeah, so because I'm a massive fan of Excel and I've sort of been born out of Excel, I love to drop the raw data out into Excel and validate it that way. So do my formulas and sums and all that in there as well. And then the other component will be sense testing it with the stakeholders, which is a huge part because my view of the world is totally different to their view. They're the subject matter experts. I'm just here to help sort of interpret the raw data for them as well.
No, thanks, Michael. Sorry, I didn't mean to dominate the questions, but it's very interesting because I'm doing something very, very similar in our space because we've just gone down the Maximo path as our asset register, but we've got an in-house works management system. So we've got two sources of information.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we're the opposite. We've been with using Maximo for a works management system for the last 2 years, and we're yet to migrate the assets over. So we've got a one-way connection from Conquest to Maximo. So we're sort of almost at opposite ends, really. So that's a good segue into the sources and resources component. So I guess what we need to consider there is this is the what. So what data is required and can we resource and manage it? I guess the key questions are, do we have the data to support our purpose and answer our questions? What barriers are there? And one of the barriers that I sort of spoke about was when I stepped into the role, we didn't have full access to Maximo at that stage. So I was sort of doing a bit of sort of blending of the access that we had and some spreadsheet reports, which moving forward will all be pulling straight out of Maximo. So what is the source of the data? Is it internal or external? Where is it stored? How can we access it? Who are the data stakeholders and custodians? Who captures it? Who checks it? Who owns and manages it? What do we know about the raw data? How reliable is it? Is it granular? Does it need aggregation? How do we need the data to look? So does the data need to be modeled? And how complex will the measures be and the calculations be? So just tipping on that, and as I mentioned earlier, without that full access, I had to sort of blend a few spreadsheets. So here we've got the core Maximo data that we had. This was some exported spreadsheet, and I think there were a few others as well. So that was one of the, I guess, the barriers that I found stepping into the role. But once we, I guess, highlighted that to some of the stakeholders, they realised that, it's pretty important that we get that full access because relying on spreadsheets, as much as I love them, isn't a reliable source of information, and plus it helps to automate things if it's just got one source of truth. So going forward, we'll have a full data model in data flows, which the idea will be that most people within the organisation, if they've got a license, will be able to access it and hopefully self-serve as well. I don't want to do myself out of a role, but I guess it's a good way to approach it so that other people can access it as well. So then the other consideration is perspective of the audience. So this is the who component. So who will use the report and how will they use it? Yeah, so who are the reporting stakeholders? Who'll develop it? Who'll project manage it? Who'll promote it? Who will use it? Who will benefit from it? And who will maintain it? Who's the target audience? Internal, external, board, exec, middle management, team leaders or coordinators. Should the audience reporting perspective be consolidated? So what do I mean by that? Should they be separate reports, or can they all be housed in one report with different levels, as I sort of showed before? There's obviously sensitivity and privacy information to consider. If you're going down the one report perspective, stuff that the board doesn't need to know, things like that. So yeah, what will the viewing frequency be? Annually, quarterly, weekly, one-off ad hoc analysis that you just need to know for a business case or something like that. What level of interrogation will be required by the end users? Does it need to be interactive? Not all reports need to be interactive. I guess the beauty of Power BI is that you can PDF them and create static images. But that definitely comes in handy with licensing if you don't have licenses for everybody. Some team meetings might just need a static PDF of a visual, but if that's the case, you need to consider that you can't have slide bars to slide down to see all the data. You have to try to capture it on one page. So this is an example of the, I guess, the targeting to the audience. So I'll just step into that. When I first started in the role, I asked one of the managers, what would you like to see from Maximo, given that we've been in there for sort of 12 months, 2 years that we've been capturing all this information. What would you like to see? And the response was, I just want to see what we've been doing, what the activity's been like. So I sort of pulled together this, I guess, high-level report summary. So it just says, so what's been completed, how many hours, how many work orders, and we can split that up by percentage of travel and work. What priority the work orders have been, how many work orders per month, so you get to see some of that seasonality, and what type of work orders were they, customer faults, planned maintenance, I can't remember the rest off the top of my head, apologies, and then sort of, I guess, what locations they were in, and we've given them the ability to, once again, filter down on certain aspects. So if we wanted to just check out all the, the priority ones, it just changes everything as well. So this would be the type of report that it's not something you'd look at every day, but maybe on a monthly basis or even quarterly or biannually. But it's really, it's a nice to know, but it's not sort of the type of report that you can make decisions on. It's just to see how things are tracking. But then the next level down is to really delve into, I guess, the assets. So this is a bit more of a targeted audience instead of the high-level summary. So it just takes a bit to render. So I'll just highlight. So once again, I'm using in the map the height in this case is the labour hours. I've created the ability to add in a switch sort of button where it can chop between labour hours and the number of work orders. So you'll see there's a particular asset in Warrnambool, and I'll just single that out a bit, hopefully. Whoops. Particular asset in Warrnambool where they've had a lot of work orders on it. So we can hover over that with the tooltip and get the history for that asset. So you'll see that there's the number of work orders completed over the last 13 months, the labour hours captured, and then the travel component to that as well. So it sort of gives them a bit of an idea of what's sort of been happening in that space. And just zoom back out. And the idea was to see, hopefully that drops back in, but not just to see what civil team has been doing, but also the elect team. So you can see that there's been a bit of activity from both sort of areas as well. And then if we click on it, you can see the seasonality of those work orders as well. So I'll just jump.
Very cool, Michael. Did it take, how long would it have taken you to sort of build this report roughly in terms of going back to stakeholders and the iteration component of getting those requirements and information? Because there's a lot in this. So it paints a great picture, like picture. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was really, there was one or two managers that I sort of spoke with, and it was quite easy because they didn't know what they wanted at the stage. And it was really, I just chucked a few ideas up and said, how about this? And then it was sort of an iterative process where they'd say, well, can you do this? What about from this angle? So this, and as I said earlier with the framework, it doesn't always apply to everything. This was a different sort of circumstance where I was really just showing what we can do with the data. It was more of a promotional thing to show what Power BI can do when it's combined with the maximum information that we have. So yeah, once again, I built the framework as a framework, not a and to be used as a guide, not a process. So I sort of broke a bit of a rule there and not following it, but this came before the framework.
No, that's fair enough. Card isn't always behind the horse. That's right. We did have another question as well from Pranam. I think it was on page 1 of the report you were just showing. They wanted to know, is what you're showing there a custom visual or just a series of bar graphs? In the first page.
Oh, sorry, I can't get back there. Hang on, I'll just try. Oh, so these ones?
So I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so that's just, all I've done is just used a shape in the background to get the shading to help sort of, I guess, segment it. And then that's just one bar graph. That's just one bar graph. And then they're just the a card visual. So as I've mentioned, I'm a big fan of Excel. So you can basically see it's just a grid. So it's just a big Excel sheet. I find that, for me personally, I find it very useful to help follow information and align things up. But yeah, I hope that answered your question.
No, it's good. So using the shapes more as like a background, as like to lay out those different categories, and the color coordination as well, which is the Wannon colors, is really good. Nice.
Yeah, and I always like to ask a question and let the data try to answer it. So what priority were the work orders? 29% were priority 4. Oh, and I forgot to mention you can hover over with some tooltips as well.
So, yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah.
We've just had another one come through as well, Michael, while you're on it. From Jan, how do you flip between work orders and hours worked in the next page? I think it's that little toggle option that you showed.
Yeah, so I had to write that down because I always forget, because I knew someone might ask me that.
Good question, Jan.
A couple of months ago, they introduced, Power BI introduced field parameters. And it's a great tool. So I've basically made 2 measures, DAX measures, and then you go to insert, I think it's parameters, and then field parameters. And what it basically does is it builds a table which allows you to flip between, so you can select the measures that you want to put in there, and it allows you to flip between them. So all I did was created a measure to count all the work orders, and then another measure to sum all the labour hours. And then when you go insert parameters and then field, you select the measures that you want to go in there. And then I just set up a toggle button and dragged the measure that is in the new table in there. And then I'll show you again in another example up ahead, but then added some conditional formatting into the visuals so that they change when the data type changes. I find it very useful because you don't have to replicate the report. It's up to the user's discretion as to what view they'd rather look at the data in. So there's no more questions. I'll just skip through to context and scale. So in considering context and scale, it's really about how do we demonstrate success and highlight key messages. So what indicators exist to measure success? KPIs, targets, internal or external benchmarking. How can we visually convey and highlight key messages? As you'll see, I love using organisations' colour palettes, which is, I think, a hangover from my consulting days, because I used to always tailor all my reporting to an organisation's sort of, I guess, corporate theme and colour. Clean visualisations, I love a lot of white space as well. Also aligning data to questions, and then aligning the questions to strategy. So there's line of sight from, I guess, what the strategy is saying and what we're trying to achieve on the ground as well. How can we provide extra context to the user? Photos, images, incorporate free text. Geotagging with latitude, longitude definitely helps extra context. How can we demonstrate comparative scale? So you'll see I use some time series, year on year, month on month is great, percentages, averages and trends, internal or external benchmarks. What filters would empower the user when interrogating the data? So I'll just skip through to this next example. So this one really highlights the scale component, which I mentioned. So I spoke earlier about a reporting requirement to the Essential Services Commission. So there's a number of indicators that we have to report on every year. This example, and I haven't fully decked out this report yet, I've only done it for this one indicator, but going forward we'll have a report for each indicator. So this indicator is the number of water supply interruptions restored within 5 hours. So this is for the financial year of 20 to 21. So what we're trying to achieve here is this red line here identifies 5 hours. So that's the water. So a customer has been out of water for greater than 5 hours, which isn't great for the customer experience. So an interruption might occur if there's a burst main and they need to shut the water down, and it could impact on a number of customers. So I guess in the past, the reporting has either been you passed it or you failed it. So what we're trying to do here is show that while we had a number of interruptions that went over 5 hours, there were a whole heap that were under it. So of the where are we? So of the 87 work orders, 92% were less than 5 hours, and there was only 8%, so 7 work orders that went over. And it's a very thin line here, but if I hover over it, we can actually bring up detail of that work order. And I think it was this one. There was one where there was a tree that fell onto a pipeline in the Otways, which is over here somewhere. It was in thick scrub. It took a long time for them to actually access the pipe and then fix it in, I think it was dark as well. So it adds another layer of context to, I guess, why that went over. It also helps the operators. It sort of celebrates that, yeah, you've done a great job. It's not you've done a bad job because you've had some that have gone over the 5 hours. So it just adds another layer of context. And then, so speaking of with, I guess, the benchmarks, so this has allowed us to say we've set, 5 hours is the benchmark that the ESC want us to sort of restore the water under. So we've set that as the target. Then there's also the next layer, which is once again going back to the audience. So this is the why. This is focusing on those work orders that actually did go over the 5-hour mark to restore the water. And then we've got a button here, which I won't click on because that takes you through to the Maximo work order as well, which is nice and handy. And I also, as a work in progress, I've put in once we do get all the ESC indicators in there, I'm looking to build, and this is just a mock-up, build almost a board and exec reporting scorecard where it'll say what the target was, what the result was, and then depending on if it is that fail or pass, then it'll get the tick or the X. And that's sort of the way that it was typically reported. But we sort of think that there needs to be a bit more information in there to help provide context. And certain audiences might just look at this page, but then it's, well, we might need to know a bit more. So then you can delve deeper as you go along. I'll just skip back to the presentation.
If it's okay, I would just another question that's just popped up.
Yeah, no worries.
From Danny in the chat. Question is, how much data quality issues did you have to deal with before you could confidently productionize your reports? Examples such as missing values, inconsistencies, inaccuracies, etc. So how do you go about that sort of data validation checking process, I guess?
Yeah, that's a really good question and very valid. As I mentioned, I'm still in the test phase, so we haven't actually got to the data validation. I'm doing it, but we're going to get external parties involved, so internal within Wannon Water, but not myself. I won't be doing it, so we'll get somebody else to help validate it as well. But part of my role is quality assurance for the ESC reporting. So one of my primary goals is to develop a dashboard that will help identify missing data, gaps in information, so that it can help fine tune that, because the process is a little bit manual at the moment. So going forward, I'm looking to build a report that will help not just myself, but almost make it a cultural thing, so that people within the maintenance centre, which is where I'm based, all have a stake in, I guess, the quality of the data. And we've also ran a series of workshops with the operators on, we've called it the why of Maximo, getting them to understand the importance of collecting data and quality. So we've really stripped it back to trying to make sure that the data that goes in is of high quality and is in there, and I guess transfer the knowledge that it's not just going into a black hole. We're using it for decision making, and also for reporting purposes, for statutory reporting. So I have found some issues with gaps in information, but as I said, going forward, we're looking to almost build a culture of data integrity. It's not always going to be 100%, but I find that if we can get it at the source, then it's going to flow through as well, hopefully. I hope that answered your question.
No, that made sense to me. It's almost like building an exception Power BI report in terms of like bringing out that information.
Yeah, correct. Yeah,
that's great. We've got a few more questions just popping up in the chat. If now's a good time.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So Simon asks, is the solution to model data from Excel spreadsheet? So can you directly connect to the application data sources, or is that in the pipeline, or what you intend to do later?
Yeah. So I've about 2 weeks ago got full access to, and I hope, just call me out if I'm not answering the question correctly or interpreting it right. But so is this for data quality, or is this just in general?
Yeah, Simon, feel free to come on.
Yeah. Yes. So in terms of a solution, in terms of building your data model within your report, so at the moment you discover you're using spreadsheets which you've imported data from whatever source you've got it from. But the long-term productionized supportable view, are you looking to connect directly to your Maximos and your works management systems, so then you can fully automate and set up a refresh schedule?
So that's what I've managed to do. We've since I think 2 weeks ago got full access, So I've been having great fun getting into SQL Server Studio, I think it's called, and having a look at the table formats and the relationships and pulling information out and dusting off my SQL queries, which I'm not too au fait in, but I'm developing that. But so going forward, we've got that direct access now. My next step is to develop a universal data model that we can put in data flows so that people can self-service as well.
Will that data model live on a SQL Server database, or will you build the model within a report itself?
Yeah, so at this stage, I'm looking to build it in Power BI, and then publish just the data model as a data flow, so that anybody will be able to access the data flow and then build their own reports. As I said, I don't want to do myself out of a role because I love doing this, but the idea is that if people want to build their own report based on the maximum information they can, and they can combine it with other data flows that we have set up in there as well.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I think we've actually got, is it Mafti with the hand raised? Feel free to come off mute and ask your question if you have a question for Michael.
Yeah, no worries. I'm just wondering why, if you're going to do a common data model, you're going to do it in a data flow as opposed to like doing it in a data set and then doing like direct query against that data set, like sharing the data set.
Yeah, that's the approach that the business has taken. Going forward, there might be other options, but at the moment, because we've got a number of different software as a service models that we're using that have existing data flows set up, that's the approach that the business has chosen to take. And I'm not too sure, I guess, on other options. So I'd be happy to hear, some other suggestions that you think might work better.
Is that Matthew, I was going to say, feel free to share your experiences in terms of how it's done if you want.
I mean, data flows is really good, but the only vulnerability that leaves you with is that the business has to do the modeling themselves, so they can get the relationships between your different entities wrong. So what you can actually do is you can, provide them with a Power BI data set, which already has those models and relationships built, and it's effectively like sharing think of data flows as sharing the Power Query, whereas like direct query against the data set it's as if you're sharing like the PBIX, like the Power BI file. So
So what you're talking about is when you publish, so those people on the call less familiar with this, we publish Power BI report up to the service, publish both the report and the data set. There's an ability from within Power BI desktop to live connect into that published data set, which automatically brings in the data model and the information as well. So I think your point's perfectly valid. There are a few different approaches.
And that's actually I don't know if I explained it well enough, but that's the approach that we are taking. So we publish the data model, not the actual file. So I think from what the explanation was, that's the approach that we're taking, so that they can then direct query from the data flow. I think we're on the same page. But the way you explained it was a lot cleaner than the way I did. As I said, I love the visualization side of things, but in terms of the back end stuff, the framework and the structure and that is different to me. It's new. I've done it by myself in the past, but I've done it in a way that I understand. So there's a whole, like even with data marts and things like that are coming out that it's well above my head. That's why there's other people in the organisation who cover those areas, which is great.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael.
Great.
No,
we got a few more questions, Michael, but look, we got 10 minutes to go, mate. If you want to continue with the presentation, are you getting close to
I've just got one more to quickly go through. So this is one that and it sounds silly, but I only pulled together the other day, so just the start of the week, and I sort of, it really highlights that what do I call it, field parameter setup again. So this is number of bursts and leaks on water mains. So we had a request for some data, and I saw the table and I spat it out into Excel and provided it to the internal customer, the colleague, and then I thought, I wonder what that would look like in a report. So I just sort of whacked it together, and just to go over that field parameter concept. So I've added the field parameters between number of work orders and labour hours again, and set it up so that if you click on the work orders, it all changes. And I've sort of tried to colour coordinate it so that, you'll see that it's clearly work orders. And then if you want to go back to look at the labour hours, it gives you the labour hour information as well. And then just the same concept where you hover over the asset, it tells you what work's been, what's happened there, number of labour hours contributed to it as well. And then just try to capture some failure reporting. So the problem, the cause, and the remedy. And going back to data integrity, you'll see that the number one cause is other. So that's made us start to reconsider how we're capturing the data. If we don't know what the cause is, we should have something in there that says undetermined instead of having other. So it's really made us sort of, I guess, highlight some deficiencies in the way that we capture data, and I guess some actions that can spawn out of that.
No, it's really good. I think there's a comment made in the chat, Michael, earlier about the sort of cleanness and the layouts and the presentation is very consistent between your reports, which obviously makes it, easier for the end users in terms of that familiarity of how, like, what areas to look at and what to click in terms of accessing and getting the data. So this looks really, really good. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I treat, I guess, the screen as real estate. And if you're thinking of reading a newspaper, most people sort of start to the top left and go right. So I look at this section up here as, I guess, what you want, the most important bits of information. And most people, like myself, are visual. And something like that really tells, I guess, what activity's been happening. So if you look over here around Camperdown area, there's been a lot of bursts and leaks in that area. So it immediately draws your eye and, I guess, brings out the questions that people have as well.
Just quickly, Michael, just a couple of outstanding questions.
Go for it.
Pat Booth asked, in relation to the Azure map, is the height extrusion a new feature? He said it didn't appear in the July 2022 documentation. Do you know if it's a new feature in your experience with Azure map?
No, it's, I reckon, about a year, I think. I was doing it, at my old previous work. So it's in size. So if you drag your data field into size, I think it is, and then in one of the options, I can't recall what it is. I apologise, but no, it's not new. It has been there for a bit.
I think it's a similar setup, Pat, if you use Mapbox Custom Visual to set up the extrusions for that. I think it is a similar setup, but again, I don't have much experience obviously with Azure Map. But yeah, I guess, to complement the report, Michael, it's a nice effect and sort of jumps out in terms of what you're presenting from the spatial sort of extrusion perspective.
Yeah, cool.
And the last question is, before I just sort of let you wrap up, it's from Kyle. Do you find that these Power BI reports help to identify the data gaps as a QA/QC tool, as opposed to trying to clean the data beforehand?
Definitely. Yeah, it definitely does. And as I just sort of pointed out, that's a perfect example. And also in here, we're talking about bursts on water mains. Yet one of the problems is leaking service pipe, which shouldn't be in there. So that's only one work order where that's occurred. But it does highlight that in Maximo, we don't have it set up that, some rules that say that if it's the asset is a water main, then you can't change the failure reporting code to a service pipe. Little things like that, which I'm not sure we can put in rules like that, but it sort of highlights it, in particular, in the capturing, that there's no facility to say that we don't know what the cause is. So people are just putting other in there as well. So yeah, definitely. And it's been a great topic of conversation amongst staff since I've sort of started, that it does highlight, what our strengths and weaknesses are in terms of the data. And it's definitely started conversations between managers as to the approach to quality of data, which is sort of why we're pushing back to say this is why we capture it. So create that conversation about data integrity and the purpose for capturing it as well. That it's not just going into a black hole. It does have a purpose as well.
No, that's excellent. Fantastic, mate. Were there any more? Or are you happy for me to wrap up?
No, that's fine. Hopefully I haven't rambled too much.
No. We're on track, on time. There is another question, but I think we can answer it. I'll just wrap up if you don't mind me just sharing screen, Michael.
Yeah, that's fine.
I can just cover the last little bits, and yeah, then we'll just try and get to that question at the end. But no, mate, absolutely fantastic presentation, and I think demoing those reports and how you've sort of addressed elements of the framework in relation to the practical example of those reports were really, really good. So thanks again for coming on. And I think everyone that dialed in on the call got a lot out of that, whether you work for water corporations or in the water industry, or just got a little bit more information about different ways to visualize water-based data in Power BI. I think Michael clearly demonstrated there's a lot of really nice, clean ways to bring transparency to that data and just have the conversations with the stakeholders and business users. Just a reminder for the next session in November, it's up on Meetup if you're keen on registering. We've got we're doing a bit of a series. Alice is going to be doing a bit of a series, DAX for Enviro's. So some of the common DAX patterns for Enviro data, whether you're looking at sort of cumulative totals or license entitlements, exceedances, groundwater quality exceedances, these sort of things. We've got two special guests, both based out of Melbourne, Sam Fisher and Greg Nash. They're a bit of sort of DAX gurus. So it's a DAX focused session with a few examples. So by all means, feel free to register for that one and bring along all your big DAX questions for these special guests here as well. As always, the session's been recorded, so we'll make it available for those people and through our blogs and our YouTube channel as well. We do have a few openings kickstart next year for anyone that's keen, whether you're a beginner or sort of experienced Power BI user. It's all about just sharing different environmental and water-based applications of Power BI. So feel free to get in touch, and we're always looking for sort of first-time speakers. And yeah, just wanted to say really, mainly thank you to Michael and for getting involved in the presentation. It was really interesting. Thanks everyone for dialing in and your great questions as well. But hopefully everyone found that useful. And with that, I'll stop the recording. Michael, you available for just a few minutes if there are further questions for people?
Yeah, definitely.
No, thanks everyone. I think there was one or two as I stopped the recording, mate. There was